On the outskirts of a small, quaint town nestled in the heart of a dense forest, there stood an old, Victorian-style house. The locals called it the Silent House. Its eerie stillness during the night and the creaking sounds that echoed through its empty halls during the day made it a topic of countless ghost stories and chilling legends. Yet, despite its ominous reputation, the house had been purchased by a young couple, Sarah and Tom, who were eager to turn it into their dream home. Sarah and Tom had been looking for a house with character, something that spoke to them on a deeper level than the modern cookie-cutter homes. When they first saw the Silent House, they were captivated by its Gothic architecture, spacious rooms, and large, overgrown garden that seemed to promise a hidden sanctuary. The price was surprisingly low, but they attributed it to the house's age and the extensive renovations it required. They moved in during late autumn, when the leaves were a riot of colors and the air carried the crisp promise of winter. The first few weeks were spent in a whirlwind of unpacking, cleaning, and planning their renovations. The Silent House, with its creaky floors and drafty windows, seemed to welcome their presence, as if it had been waiting for them. It started with small things. At first, Sarah noticed that some of her belongings were not where she had left them. A book she had been reading would end up on a different table, or a picture frame would be slightly askew. She brushed it off as the result of her own absent-mindedness or Tom's careless movements. One evening, while Tom was working late, Sarah decided to take a relaxing bath. As she soaked in the tub, she heard soft, almost imperceptible whispers. The sounds were so faint that she couldn't make out any words. She called out, "Tom, is that you?" But there was no response. She dismissed it as the wind whistling through the old house's many cracks and settled back into her bath. However, the whispers persisted, growing louder and more distinct. Sarah, now feeling uneasy, quickly finished her bath and wrapped herself in a towel. As she stepped out of the bathroom, she saw a shadow move down the hallway. Her heart pounded in her chest, but when she flicked on the lights, there was nothing there. When Tom came home, she told him about her experience. He tried to comfort her, suggesting that her imagination was running wild due to the stress of the move and the house's spooky reputation. But Sarah couldn't shake off the feeling that something was wrong. The days turned into weeks, and the odd occurrences became more frequent. Objects continued to move on their own, strange noises echoed through the halls, and both Sarah and Tom felt an unsettling presence in the house. One night, as they were lying in bed, they heard footsteps outside their bedroom door. Tom got up to investigate, but found nothing. Determined to get to the bottom of these disturbances, they decided to set up cameras around the house. They hoped that the footage would either catch an intruder or put their minds at ease by showing that nothing was there. The cameras, however, only deepened the mystery. The next morning, they reviewed the footage. To their horror, the cameras had captured eerie phenomena, doors opening and closing on their own, chairs sliding across the floor, and shadowy figures moving through the rooms. In one particularly chilling clip, a figure stood at the foot of their bed, watching them as they slept. Determined to understand what was happening, Sarah and Tom began researching the history of the Silent House. They discovered that the house had once belonged to a wealthy family in the early 1900s. The family had mysteriously disappeared, and the house had remained vacant for years until it was eventually put up for sale. Local legends spoke of a tragic tale. The family had been haunted by a vengeful spirit. It was said that the father had wronged someone, leading to a curse being placed on the family. They had tried to flee, but the spirit had followed them, driving them to madness and ultimately to their deaths. The house, it seemed, had absorbed their pain and suffering, becoming a vessel for the restless spirit. Sarah and Tom decided to contact a paranormal investigator, hoping that they could find a way to rid the house of its dark presence. The investigator, a middle-aged woman named Claire, arrived a few days later. She brought with her an array of equipment and a wealth of knowledge about the supernatural. Claire conducted a thorough investigation of the house. She used EMF meters, infrared cameras, and audio recorders to detect any paranormal activity. As she moved through the house, she explained that spirits often lingered in places where they had experienced intense emotions or trauma. She believed that the silent house was indeed haunted by a tormented spirit. In the basement, Claire discovered an old, dusty journal hidden behind a loose brick. The journal belonged to the former owner, Mr. Harrington. It chronicled his descent into madness as he was tormented by the spirit. He wrote about seeing shadows, hearing whispers, and feeling an oppressive presence that grew stronger each day. The final entry was particularly chilling: "The spirit will not let us go. We are trapped in its grip. I fear we shall never escape." Claire explained that the spirit was likely bound to the house by unresolved emotions or unfinished business. To free it, they would need to find out what it wanted and help it find peace. Sarah and Tom were determined to put an end to the haunting, not just for their sake, but for the spirits as well. With Claire's guidance, Sarah and Tom prepared for a seance. They hoped to communicate with the spirit and learn what it wanted. The three of them sat in a circle in the living room, surrounded by candles and protective symbols. Claire began the seance, calling out to the spirit and asking it to reveal itself. At first, there was nothing but silence. Then, the temperature in the room dropped dramatically, and a cold wind swept through the house. The candles flickered, and the shadows seemed to grow darker. Claire continued to call out to the spirit, urging it to speak. Suddenly, the room was filled with a deafening roar. The spirit manifested in front of them, a ghostly figure shrouded in darkness. It spoke in a voice that echoed with pain and anger, revealing that it was the spirit of a woman named Eliza. She had been wronged by Mr. Harrington, who had betrayed her and left her to die. Her spirit had been trapped in the house ever since, consumed by a desire for vengeance. Sarah and Tom listened in horror as Eliza recounted her tragic story. Claire gently asked Eliza what she needed to find peace. The spirit hesitated, then said she wanted justice. She wanted her story to be known and her suffering to be acknowledged. Determined to help Eliza find peace, Sarah and Tom decided to uncover the truth about her death and bring her story to light. They delved into historical records, interviewed local historians, and pieced together the details of Eliza's life and tragic end. It turned out that she had been a servant in the Harrington household, and Mr. Harrington had promised to marry her. When she became pregnant, he abandoned her, leading to her untimely death. Armed with this information, they decided to hold a memorial service for Eliza, acknowledging her suffering and giving her the recognition she deserved. They invited the townspeople, sharing Eliza's story and asking for their support in honoring her memory. The memorial service was a solemn but beautiful affair. As they spoke of Eliza's life and the injustice she had suffered, the air seemed to grow lighter, and the oppressive presence in the house began to lift. For the first time in years, the silent house felt warm and welcoming. With Eliza's spirit at peace, the haunting ceased. The house was no longer filled with whispers and shadows, but with light and laughter. Sarah and Tom continued their renovations, turning the silent house into a vibrant, loving home. They decided to keep Eliza's story alive, sharing it with anyone who asked about the house's history. They wanted people to remember her and to understand the importance of justice and compassion. The house became a symbol of healing and redemption, a place where the past was acknowledged and the future was filled with hope. The silent house, once a place of fear and darkness, had been transformed by the power of empathy and understanding. Sarah and Tom's determination to help a tormented spirit find peace not only freed the house from its haunting but also brought them closer together. Their journey through the shadows had taught them the value of listening to the past and the importance of giving voice to those who had been wronged. In the end, the true horror was not the presence of a ghost, but the injustice and suffering that had bound her to the house. By confronting that horror and seeking to make amends, Sarah and Tom had turned a place of despair into a beacon of hope. The silent house stood as a testament to the enduring power of compassion and the belief that even the darkest stories could have a brighter ending. It was a frigid December night when Claire Thompson found herself alone in her family's sprawling Victorian house. The house, with its creaking floorboards and whispering walls, had always seemed both enchanting and eerie. Tonight, the house felt more like a trap than a home. Claire's parents had left for a week-long business trip, and her younger brother was at a friend's house for a sleepover. Being 17, Claire was deemed old enough to stay home alone, and she relished the independence. But tonight, as the wind howled and branches scraped against the windows, she felt a gnawing sense of unease. It all began when she was settling down in the living room, watching an old horror movie to pass the time. The house was dark, save for the flickering light from the TV. Claire was curled up on the couch, wrapped in a warm blanket, when she heard the first noise. A soft, almost imperceptible knock came from the basement door. Claire paused the movie and listened, her heart pounding in her chest. "It's just the wind," she told herself, but the sound persisted. She mustered the courage to investigate, grabbing her phone for light. The basement door was ajar, which was unusual since her parents always kept it locked. The air grew colder as she descended the creaky stairs, and the smell of damp earth filled her nostrils. She reached the bottom, shining her phone's flashlight around. Nothing seemed out of place, but the unsettling feeling remained. As she turned to go back upstairs, she saw it, a faint figure in the corner of the basement, shrouded in darkness. She froze, her breath caught in her throat. The figure moved slightly, and Claire's rational mind screamed at her to run, but curiosity and fear rooted her in place. "Who are you?" she managed to whisper, her voice trembling. The figure stepped forward, revealing itself to be a man, gaunt and ghostly pale. His eyes were hollow, and his clothes tattered. "Help me," he croaked, reaching out a skeletal hand. Claire stumbled backward, tripping over a loose floorboard. She scrambled to her feet and raced up the stairs, slamming the door shut behind her. Her heart raced as she locked the door and backed away, her mind struggling to process what she had seen. She called the police, her hands shaking. "There's someone in my house," she stammered. "In the basement. Please hurry." The operator assured her that help was on the way, but every second felt like an eternity. Claire could hear movement below, faint but persistent. She retreated to the kitchen, grabbing a knife for protection. Minutes later, the sound of sirens pierced the night. The police arrived, 2 officers quickly making their way inside. Claire directed them to the basement, and they descended cautiously, weapons drawn. They returned after a thorough search, finding no trace of the man Claire had seen. "Are you sure you weren't imagining things?" one officer asked gently. Claire's frustration bubbled over. "I know what I saw. He was real." The officers exchanged glances, clearly skeptical. "We'll patrol the area and keep an eye on things. Call us if anything else happens." Feeling dismissed and more isolated than ever, Claire tried to calm her racing thoughts. She locked all the doors and windows, double-checking every room. Exhausted, she finally returned to the living room, the knife still clutched in her hand. Hours passed, and the house seemed to settle into an uneasy silence. Claire dozed off on the couch, only to be jolted awake by a loud crash from the basement. Her heart leapt into her throat as she heard heavy footsteps ascending the stairs. The basement door burst open, and the gaunt man stood there, his eyes locked onto hers. "You have to help me," he pleaded, his voice echoing with desperation. Claire's instincts screamed for her to run, but something in the man's eyes gave her pause. He didn't seem malicious, just desperate and lost. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Help me find her," he said, his voice cracking. "She's trapped." Confusion and fear swirled in Claire's mind. Who is she?" "The girl, she's been here for so long," he said, his eyes wide with fear and sadness. "In the walls." The revelation sent a chill down Claire's spine. She had heard stories about the house's dark past, but her parents always dismissed them as local legends. Now, confronted with this spectral figure, those stories seemed all too real. The man turned and began walking back towards the basement, and despite her fear, Claire followed. She needed answers, and something told her this was the only way to find them. The basement felt even colder than before. The man led her to a far corner, where the wall appeared, solid but weathered. "Here," he said, pointing to a spot on the wall. "She's here." Claire hesitated, then pressed her ear against the wall. At first, she heard nothing. Then, faintly, she heard it, a soft, muffled crying. Her blood ran cold. She grabbed a nearby hammer, her hands trembling as she started to chip away at the wall. The man's presence gave her an eerie strength, his eyes urging her on. After what felt like hours, she broke through to a small, hidden room. Inside, the air was musty and stale. In the dim light of her phone, Claire saw a figure huddled in the corner. A girl, frail and ghostly pale, just like the man. Her eyes, wide with fear and relief, locked onto Claire's. "Thank you," the girl whispered, her voice barely audible. Claire helped her out, her mind racing with questions. "Who are you? How did you get here?" The girl looked at the man, who stood silently nearby. "We were trapped, so long ago. I thought no one would ever find us." Claire's heart ached with empathy and fear. "What happened to you?" "We lived here, many years ago," the man began. "A dark presence took hold of the house. It trapped us, feeding off our fear. We've been trying to escape ever since." The pieces of the puzzle started to fall into place. The eerie stories, the strange occurrences, it all made sense now. "What do we do? How can I help you?" "You already have," the girl said, her eyes filled with gratitude. "By finding us, you've broken the curse. We can finally move on." As they spoke, the air in the basement began to change, growing warmer and lighter. The oppressive weight that had filled the house seemed to lift. The man and the girl began to fade, their forms becoming translucent. "Thank you," the man said, his voice filled with relief. "You've set us free." Claire watched in awe as they disappeared, their spirits finally at peace. The basement was silent once more, but this time it felt serene, not sinister. She climbed the stairs, her mind buzzing with the night's events. Exhausted but relieved, she collapsed on the couch, falling into a deep, dreamless sleep. When she awoke the next morning, the house felt different. The oppressive atmosphere was gone, replaced by a sense of calm. Claire knew that whatever had haunted the house for so long was finally gone. She spent the day cleaning up the basement, finding old, forgotten items and relics of the past. Among them, she found a faded photograph of the man and the girl, their smiles frozen in time. She kept it as a reminder of the night she had freed them. When her parents returned, Claire tried to explain what had happened, but they were skeptical, attributing her story to an overactive imagination. But Claire knew the truth, and that was enough. Years later, when Claire had her own family, she often thought back to that night. The echoes of solitude and fear had been replaced by a deep sense of peace and understanding. She had faced her fears and uncovered a hidden past, freeing two lost souls in the process. And every December, as the wind howled and branches scraped against the windows, Claire would remember the man and the girl, and the night she spent alone in the house that was no longer haunted.